In the mid-1960s, drag racing was a sport in search of a soul. It was fast, it was loud, and it was technical, but it was missing something vital. It was missing a reason for people to care about the man behind the wheel, not just the machine itself. That changed when a young man named Russell James Liberman rolled up to Fremont Raceway in California and decided he was going to be more than just a racer. He was going to be unforgettable. He was going to become Jungle Jim. Liberman's entry into the world of drag racing wasn't the story of a kid who grew up dreaming of the strip. He started like so many others, racing in the stock class at Fremont in 1964, piloting his own 1957 Chevy. But unlike most racers who were content to simply compete, Liberman had a vision. In 1965, he made the leap to funny cars, climbing behind the wheel of a nitromethane-fueled Nova dubbed Hercules. He was raw, hungry to prove something. Then came his drive in Lou Arrington's supercharged GTO funny car called Brutus. This car, this ride, this opportunity, it was the beginning of something special. By 1966, Liberman had gone out on his own. He built his first car, a supercharged Chevy 2, and plastered Jungle Jim across the side. But here's the thing about 1966. Nobody outside a tight circle of hardcore drag racing enthusiasts knew who Jungle Jim was. He was just another guy with a funny car trying to make noise on the quarter mile. In 1967, that changed forever. Liberman went on a barnstorming tour across the country, and fans couldn't take their eyes off him. Here was a guy making 8-second runs in his Chevy when the factory-sponsored drivers in their professionally funded cars were dipping into the sevens. Nobody should have cared about a car that was slower than the competition. But they did. They cared because there was something different about this guy. There was showmanship, charisma, and an undeniable sense that Jungle Jim was going to give you something you'd never forget. By 1967, Liberman had established himself as a household name in drag racing circles across America. The machine itself was good, but the man driving it was what drew people to the track. In 1968, his success prompted him to expand. He started running a 2-car team. His first choice to pilot the second car was Claire Sanders, and she won the 1969 NHRA Funny Car Eliminator title at the Winter Nationals, driving one of Jungle Jim's cars, not even in Jim's own machine. That victory proved something crucial. Jungle Jim had created a brand. And in drag racing, in a sport where most people could barely name the top drivers, Jungle Jim was that brand. What made Jungle Jim different? What made him legendary? It wasn't just speed, and it certainly wasn't his record at national NHRA events. In his entire career, Jungle Jim won exactly one NHRA national event, the 1975 Summer Nationals at Englishtown, New Jersey, where he defeated Tom Prock. One win. Yet in 2001, the NHRA named him the 17th greatest driver in the organization's history, ahead of drivers with far more national event victories. How is that possible? The answer lies in understanding what Jungle Jim understood that his competitors didn't. Drag racing wasn't just about speed, it was about entertainment. His burnouts became legendary. We're not talking about short, functional burnouts designed to heat up the tires. We're talking about massive clouds of white tire smoke, flames shooting from the headers, the acrid smell of burning rubber mixing with nitromethane fumes. These weren't just mechanical preparations. They were theater. They were the opening act of a show that had the entire grandstand on its feet. Fans couldn't look away. Kids would sneak out of their seats to get closer to the burnout box just to feel the heat, to smell that distinctive odor, to be part of something electric. But here's where it got crazy. After completing his burnout, instead of slowly creeping forward to the starting line like every other racer, Jungle Jim would put his car in reverse and drive backward at 100 miles per hour. Crew members would scatter. Fans in the bleachers would gasp. It was insane. It shouldn't have been possible, but it was, and only Jungle Jim did it. Then came the staging, and then the tree would drop. And that's where things got truly dangerous. Jungle Jim had a philosophy: never lift. When a run went completely out of shape, when his car was bouncing all over the track, when the back end was sliding sideways and he was headed toward the guardrail, Jungle Jim kept his foot in it. He refused to lift off the throttle. He pushed through the chaos, forced the car to the finish line no matter how wild the ride got. As one contemporary put it, Jungle was a maniac and everybody loved him. This approach was absolutely reckless by today's safety standards, but in the 1970s, it was revolutionary. It showed commitment. It showed heart. It showed that Jungle Jim wasn't just another driver following the script. He was willing to risk everything for the show, and the fans ate it up. Nobody cared that his cars were making 8-second passes while the competition was in the 7s. They cared about Jungle Jim's refusal to lift. They cared about the smoke. They cared about the backwards burnout at 100 miles per hour. They cared because they were watching entertainment, not just racing. In 1972, something happened that would elevate Jungle Jim from popular racer to absolute icon. He met an 18-year-old girl named Pamela Hardy on a street in Westchester, Pennsylvania. Liberman was driving his yellow Corvette when he spotted her walking. He pulled over. He introduced himself. Within 2 weeks, she had left her plans to attend Westchester State University, ditched the college that had accepted her, and hit the road with Jungle Jim. Her mother was furious. Her father was concerned. But Pamela Hardy, who would soon become known to millions as Jungle Pam, was ready for an adventure. Now, Liberman wasn't stupid. He understood exactly what he was doing when he brought Pam into the picture. An attractive young woman on the starting line at a drag strip? That was going to draw attention. But he also trained her. He taught her precision. He taught her confidence. She wasn't just there to look pretty. She had responsibilities. She staged the car. She checked under the vehicle for fluid leaks before a run. She filled the block with water and 8 quarts of oil, packed parachutes after each run, and helped Liberman reposition his car on the line after his burnouts. This required guts. This required presence of mind. This required someone who understood what Jungle Jim was trying to do. And it worked. The combination of Jungle Jim's wild driving, his flaming burnouts, his backward 100-mile-per-hour rides, and Jungle Pam's striking presence on the starting line created a phenomenon that drag racing had never seen before. Promoters began demanding the team. Track owners couldn't book Jungle Jim without Jungle Pam. Fans showed up just to see them. They weren't just drag racers anymore. They were celebrities. They were a spectacle. For drag racing in the early 1970s, a sport that was struggling to maintain relevance against mainstream motorsports, this was revolutionary. Pam Hardy later described her life with Jungle Jim. All that showmanship was his true personality. He just didn't turn that on at the track and then become normal like everyone else at home. He had that sort of flair even when we were just at the house or went out someplace. You could always feel his presence wherever he was. Jungle Jim wasn't putting on an act. The wild man, the showman, the guy who refused to conform to anybody's rules, that was who he really was. That flair, that inability to do anything halfway, that's what made him legendary. Here's the thing about Jungle Jim. He distrusted the NHRA circuit. The national events were expensive. They were time-consuming. They required you to win to make real money. So instead, Jungle Jim chose the match racing circuit, the barnstorming tours that took him from track to track, city to city, week after week. In this world, you showed up. You raced 3 rounds. You collected your appearance fee whether you won or lost, and you moved on to the next track. The money was guaranteed. It was dependent on drawing a crowd, not on winning. And Jungle Jim drew crowds like no one else in the sport. During the 1970s, Liberman averaged an estimated 100 events per year. 100. That means he was on the road constantly, traveling from Budds Creek, Maryland, to Irwindale Raceway to far-flung strips in Canada. He was everywhere. He was inescapable. Every weekend, somewhere in America, Jungle Jim was at a track, putting on a show. His team traveled in a constant caravan: Jungle Jim, Jungle Pam, crew chief Peter White, and sometimes other crew members like Berserko Bob Dorer. It was a road show that never ended, a traveling carnival of drag racing and spectacle. The cars changed over the years. The Chevy 2 gave way to a 1970 Camaro, which was eventually replaced by a stunning candy blue 1972 Chevrolet Vega. This Vega, designed by Romeo Palomides and bodied by Ron Pellegrini's company, Fiberglass Limited, was painted by Bob Gerdes of Circus Custom Paint and lettered by Jules Barret, known as Mr. J. It was a work of art. It was also a Revel model kit, which means that kids all over America could buy a scale version of Jungle Jim's car and build it in their bedrooms. Jungle Jim had become so famous that toy companies were manufacturing his likeness. He wasn't just a drag racer anymore. He was a brand, a phenomenon that transcended the sport. But here's the critical thing. By focusing on match racing, Jungle Jim largely avoided the NHRA circuit where the money came from winning, not from drawing crowds. He won one national event in his entire career. One. Yet fans loved him more than drivers who had won dozens. Why? Because Jungle Jim had figured out something that modern drag racing teams are still trying to understand. Personality matters more than victory sometimes. Spectacle matters. Entertainment matters. Jungle Jim proved that you could become a legend, could fill grandstands, could become a household name in your sport without relying on a trophy case full of championships. But there's a darker side to every story, and the Jungle Jim story is no exception. The same energy that made him a legend on the track, the refusal to ever slow down, the need to always perform, the demand for constant excitement, that same energy was consuming him. By the mid-1970s, rumors had begun to circulate through the racing community. There was talk of heavy drinking. There was talk of drug use. There were whispers about the pressures that came with always being on stage, always being Jungle Jim, never being able to just be Russell Liberman. A contemporary observer noted seeing Jungle Jim at Irwindale Raceway in 1974, completely incapacitated from a hit of acid he'd dropped the evening before a race. At the last minute, Russell Doughboy Long had to be called to drive the Vega in his place. On another occasion, Liberman made a 4 a.m. phone call to an acquaintance, drug-addled and unable to sleep, needing to talk to anyone who would listen. The man who was supposed to be unstoppable was struggling. Jungle Jim and Jungle Pam had separated. The partnership that had defined drag racing in the early 1970s was falling apart. The relationship that had been so iconic, so perfectly suited to the show that Liberman was putting on, was deteriorating. The cracks in the foundation were showing. Behind the flaming burnouts and the 100-mile-per-hour backward drives, behind the charisma and the showmanship, Jungle Jim was a troubled man struggling with the pressure of constant performance, with personal demons, with the impossibility of ever being able to just step off the stage and be normal. His partner, Pam Hardy, who had seen both sides of him, later recalled, "He lived like every day was a race. His energy, the same thing that made him a legend on the track, could also turn destructive." Jim's refusal to slow down, his inability to lift off the throttle, wasn't just a racing philosophy. It was a personality trait that defined everything he did, on the track and off. By September 1977, Jungle Jim Liberman was 31 years old. He had been racing professionally in funny cars for 12 years. He had driven at more than 1,000 events. He had inspired countless fans, had created an empire based on his personality and showmanship, had fundamentally changed what it meant to be a drag racer. He had also been talking, in recent conversations with those close to him, about stepping away. He was considering building engines instead of racing, a quiet career shift that would have taken the Showman off the track. Around 2 a.m. on the morning of September 9, 1977, Jungle Jim was driving his beloved Chevrolet Corvette through West Goshen Township near West Chester, Pennsylvania. He wasn't at a racetrack. There were no cameras. There were no cheering crowds. There was no show. Just Jim, the open road, and the same need for speed that had defined his entire life. Witnesses later said he was moving too fast. He attempted to pass another vehicle. In an instant, his Corvette crossed into the opposite lane and collided head-on with a parked SEPTA transit bus. The impact was catastrophic. His car was wedged underneath the front bumper and under chassis of the bus. First responders arrived at the scene and began the grim task of extracting him from the wreckage. It took them more than 45 minutes to get his body out. Jungle Jim Liberman was dead at the scene, killed in a street accident in the same manner that so many of his fans had feared, at the wheel of a fast car, going too fast, unable or unwilling to slow down. He died just 3 days before his 32nd birthday. The racing community was stunned. Jungle Jim wasn't just another driver, he had been an icon. He had been the original showman, the guy who understood that drag racing could be more than just quarter-mile speed runs. He had been the man who proved that personality could sell tickets just as effectively as horsepower. For drag racing in the 1970s, Jungle Jim had been the voice, the face, the embodiment of the sport's wildest, freest era. Jungle Pam Hardy stepped away from the sport immediately after his death. She never worked with another driver. The partnership that had defined an era ended in an instant. She would occasionally make appearances at drag racing events to honor Jungle Jim's memory, but her active career was over. The woman who had been so integral to the Jungle Jim show, who had starred in Revel model kits and had been featured in countless magazine spreads, quietly withdrew from public life. She built a new life in Westchester, Pennsylvania, the town where she had first met Jungle Jim. In 2016, almost 40 years later, Jungle Pam returned to the drag racing scene briefly, appearing at the NHRA Finals in Pomona, California, where she helped guide a competitor to the starting line. It was a nostalgic gesture, a nod to her iconic days alongside Jungle Jim on the starting line. But it was also clear that drag racing had moved on. The 1970s were fading into memory. Corporate sponsorships were becoming more important. Professional handlers managed driver images. Drivers spoke in talking points instead of with raw personality. The barnstorming circuit, the traveling caravan, the anything-goes spirit of match racing, it was all becoming history. Jungle Jim's death marked the end of an era in drag racing, a moment when the sport began to professionalize, to corporatize, to lose some of the wild, reckless charm that he had embodied. But here's the thing. Jungle Jim's legacy didn't die on that street in Westchester, Pennsylvania. Modern drag racing showmen, from John Force to today's personalities, owe a debt to Jungle Jim Liberman. He proved that drag racing could be entertainment, that personality could be as important as performance, that the fans showed up not just for speed, but for spectacle. He understood, decades before social media and personal branding became central to motorsports, that you had to give people a reason to care about you as a person, not just as a driver. Russell James, Jungle Jim Liberman, lived only 31 years. He won one NHRA national event. By the statistics that define most racing careers, he would be a footnote in drag racing history. But he was so much more than statistics. He was the wild man who refused to conform, who refused to slow down, who understood that drag racing was about more than just going fast. It was about putting on a show. He was the man who changed an entire sport, who proved that personality and entertainment could matter as much as horsepower and victory. And even though he's been gone for nearly 50 years, Jungle Jim remains unforgettable. The showman who gave drag racing its soul is gone, but his legacy lives on in every driver who understands that fans want more than just fast cars. They want something unforgettable.